Good day and welcome to another edition of the Faith and Real Life Podcast. My name is Greg Wasinski and I am joined by Mrs. Millie Prebel, my co-host and my partner, my faith, like handball partner where we bounce things off of each other.
Absolutely.
Good to see you. And here we are the week of the election.
Yes.
Like post-election, so we're dating this podcast, but if any of the references that we give might relate to that, you kind of have a context as to where we're going. But, social media has really taken over as the way that we get all of our information. So you said to me the other day, let's talk about faith in social media. We need some good stuff out there.
Right. I think it is such a powerful tool that when harnessed in the appropriate manner can move mountains.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you're part of Coffee and Conversation in the mornings that we do, and we do it during the weekdays at 7:30 in the morning Eastern Standard Time, and Millie does Wednesdays, and I do a few other days during the week. But, two things happened this week that really surprised me, and one was that we had a person from Malaysia watching, which was really cool, not only watching, but commenting.
Right.
And then we received an email from somebody that just talked about how during this entire time of the pandemic that the show has changed her faith. And this is only possible by social media.
Right. I think it's definitely encouraging for any of us, apostolic warriors out there on social media to try and move the needle, because there is so much noise and so much to sift through that we have to be cognizant and prepared and aware of the content that we're allowing just to stream, randomly through our brains.
Well, and certainly when it comes to our faith, I mean, this has been a way that people have used as a main platform to communicate. Our young people, they don't even text anymore. They Snapchat each other, and it's a picture of the same face that is supposed to emote different moods and, somehow emote a different situation. But it really is. It's kind of like your right eye, maybe your peace sign fingers in it. And that is the way that we communicate. But this aspect of what people are longing for, I think it comes down to faith on social media gives us the ability to meet people who aren't showing up in our churches right now. Right. And so we have to meet them. We have to realize they're on social media.
Right.
Like they're not in the church, so we can't talk to them like they're in the church or they showed up for a reason. We want to meet the person who is broken, who's apathetic, who maybe walked away, or a person who is faithful, who's just longing for the gospel message in a different way that will relate to them today in the same way that they need to hear it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reviewing a book, The Prison Writings by Father Albert Delp, and I might have the first name wrong. But anyways, he wrote, it was 40 years ago or so, and he talked about, the Christian church, the Catholic Church needs to meet not people in Jesus, we need to meet them in their humanity. And here, this was, 40 years ago.
Yeah,
so,
right.
we joke, when I say y'all just need Jesus, it's like, y'all just need some compassion. Y'all just need me to see where you are, acknowledge where you are, companion where you are, and then we can talk about the faith message at some point. But if we don't find people where they are in their humanity and in those needs, we're never going to reach them.
Well, and here's the difference about the growth of social media is that when Bishop Fulton Sheen was on television or Mother Angelica maybe started EWTN or Joe Osteen or Billy Graham or all these evangelizers that used media in its traditional form in some way, they were individuals who got the platform because somebody gave them that opportunity. Social media is very different because everybody who has an account becomes an expert on something. So if something looks bad for a Christian, I read the source of the person who wrote it, and I'm like, that person's not a Christian in the essence of what they're saying. Like, you want to be angry at the church or what the church did, but this person that represents what they call a church is not really a church. Or it might be somebody who means well, but isn't educated.
Right.
And takes something out of context. And it doesn't mean that, no, you shouldn't post your inspirational quotes or the Bible verse that really meant a lot to you. That's not what I'm saying. But if we try to interpret something, we have responsibility in order to understand what we're telling other people and what it might mean for their relationship with God.
Absolutely. I'm taking a class at our parish right now with Father Mike Stala on discipleship, and his whole purpose of this class is to form us as better catechists of the faith.
Yeah.
So when we do when we are out there, when we are speaking, when we do come to some confrontations about faith, we have answers that are based in our apostolic tradition. So,
Right.
Sometimes we can have a person that has a heart on fire for the Lord that can't communicate the proper doctrine or the church, dogma. So not that it has to be all doctrine and dogma,
Right.
but that's where I think sometimes lose people is in sources that aren't exactly vetted.
Right.
And that's a problem with everything on
Sure.
social media. Sometimes people don't look any further than the screen to see who's saying what their background is. It's an old advertising, message. Like,
Yeah.
look at the source. Who is benefiting from this message?
Well, and that's where I would say there's 4 different things that I would call a user or somebody who wants to evangelize or share faith. Number 1 is, what do you feel called to share? So that would be the first thing. First thing is, what do you feel called to share? Not like, I just want to share this, but what do you feel called to share? That would be number 1. Number 2, who is your audience? If you are trying to speak to other people that believe the same thing as you and you just want to reaffirm it, you want to vent, whatever, it's your personal Facebook page. You have that right to do that. But if that's your audience, then that's what you're going to, that's who you're going to think about when you do the next step, which is step number 3, and that's create your message. So now you know what you're called to talk about. You've thought about who you want to speak to, and now you create the message. And then there's one step further in social media that goes beyond other media forms, and that is understanding the platform that you're going to evangelize on. So I always laugh because, early on in Twitter, I won't say us older people, but us older people that weren't used to social media would write big, long paragraphs or texting. If you ever text with your kids, you'll know that they're like, oh, God, you have a break in there. Like, why is this so long? Why do you have 3 paragraphs in a text? And they've kind of come to my level, so I'm proud of them. But that's the 4th point, is that you need to understand the media that you're posting to and how long people are really going to spend to get to your point. So if you feel that you have something valid and you know that it has credibility and you feel called to share it, well, then just make sure that you share it the right way.
Right. And I think it brings up the great point of, look at the greatest evangelizer of the Catholic Church and St. Paul. St. Paul was constantly refining his message for his audience. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that, to know, again, who you're trying to reach. And I'll go one step further even. I feel called a lot of times by the Holy Spirit. I mean, I read a lot of different information. I have to read a lot of different things for school, but I still also go through a lot of different devotionals or books that I have interest in, especially when I hear a podcast or I'm listening to, like, the Catholic Women's Conference. They talked about this, Interior Freedom from Jacques Philippe. I mean, 2 people referenced it. I thought, well, I got to have that book.
Just the name Jacques Philippe sounds like a book that I don't belong reading. I mean,
it's a lot easier to read than you would think, because I wouldn't have stuck with it. But it's very, we really do need to look at some of the sources of, where can we truly get fed if we want to click on an image or a link, understanding that this isn't kind of like, here's your, evangelization for the day. I mean, it is the responsibility then of the consumer of the information, that if you do want to go deeper, then there's a link or there's somewhere else, or like I said, I heard about this book and I went on Amazon and bought the book. So there almost needs to be more of a call to action as well, which is...
You bring up a good point, because there's who we're called to be as the one who posts, and then there's one that, what is our responsibility as the listener or the consumer, as you called it, in order for us to understand, which I guess would even be a point number 5 that I would add in after my other 4 is that, where is your prayer life?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and this is a question, you know this from Spiritual Direction.
Oh, yeah.
It's the very first question
Always.
that, you know, how's your prayer life,
Yeah.
right? This is huge for how we handle everything in life.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you that I can get past certain things on social media if my prayer life is strong
Mm-hmm.
and not respond.
Mm-hmm.
Where if I'm weak in my prayer life,
Mm-hmm.
I can get baited
Oh, yeah.
very easily.
Drawn right into it.
Yeah. So I think that's this piece of where is my prayer life?
Mm-hmm.
And in the aspect of posting, let's just talk about it from that standpoint. You said a great thing earlier today that, you know, you talked about how this fills the gap, that social media fills the gap of the church. Give me a little more on what that really means and how you've seen that happen.
I mean, when the coronavirus hit, and they were closing churches, there was no other alternative but for these churches to go online.
Mm-hmm.
And it looked a lot different for a lot of different churches. I know some of them had more tech-savvy staff, and some put in some staff to help with the
This is where the Catholics are a little far behind. I know.
I don't know. Some of them are doing some amazing, things. But I think, for those of us faithful, I'm a daily mass goer. I mean, I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't had online mass.
Yeah.
You just get so used to your routine. But then again, I think in a way it gave me a new appreciation. Because I sometimes take for granted that we do have, church, that we can just drop in on. So it definitely gave me a greater appreciation for the building itself and for the freedom of the religion that we have, the community, all of it. But it certainly, and it's still filling a gap for those that need to be, stay at home and can't, they are either immune compromised or they have some, comorbidities or they're elderly. But we talked about too, it's like, I go to church and you do, and, half the people in the church are the ones that are at high risk. So.
Yeah, right. So everybody,
kind of
you want to say, like,
ironic.
you're not supposed to be here. And then I'm like, but I'm here. But yeah, it's like but they hunger and thirst for what is more, right? And they're not part of a generation that's going to live on social media or live on technology.
Right.
They're traditionalists. So it's a double-edged sword. But we can even connect with that generation. We can connect with any generation on social media.
Right.
You and I have seen this happen countless times. And how we do that becomes important because it's about the quality and not the quantity. So if you post 100 times a day, people eventually are going to be like, oh my gosh, what is she putting up there? Or what is he putting up there? And they're not going to read it. But if you leave them wanting more, just as if when you're a presenter that you leave them wanting more, they come back. And, the Catechism of the Catholic Church even addresses a little bit of mass media. And you would think that I couldn't go to the Catechism today and find out anything that would relate to our subject.
I know if it's there, you're going to find it, though.
But I did. I went in, and this is, it's very beautiful, the way that this kind of summarizes. But I'm going to talk about specifically what it means to use social media. And I'm going to read this to you, and then I'm going to tell you what part of the Catechism it's from. And if you don't know, it's really cool that when you find out where it's from. And again, why I love this book. All right. So paragraph number 2496 says this: the means of social communication, especially the mass media, as they called it then, can give a rise to certain passivity among users, making them less than vigilant consumers of what is said or shown. Users should practice moderation and discipline in their approach to the mass media. They will want to form enlightened and correct consciences the more easily to resist unwholesome influences. So this aspect of the Catechism telling us, like, don't get crazy. Don't post like 800 things a day. Don't water down the gospel. Make them want to hear it in its fullness. And this paragraph of talking about mass media actually falls under the 8th commandment, loving your neighbor as yourself. So they're talking, and then it goes further into talk about truth and beauty and sacredness. but it's really in here that it's part of our responsibility to love our neighbor as ourselves and to be responsible with the media that we're given.
Right.
I think it's just really cool.
Yeah, well, there is a responsibility. We talked about that, about content and, what you do put out there. And, before doing this podcast, I was in hairdressing, and I had a radio show that I did a marketing segment. And so a lot of this is very familiar. Social media was just kind of coming on the scene when I was doing
it's not
all
like the
these,
whole faith thing is some, groundbreaker.
but the rules of social media apply, everywhere, not just for our Catholic faith, And I think you're right. I think we do, especially if you're trying to make a difference. I mean, if you're just out there connecting with your grandma and your, whatever.
It's different.
But that was the thing that, I talked about too. It's like, social media has leveled the playing field of media.
Right.
Because everybody can have a platform.
Right.
So imagine back in the day, that was huge. You could have a YouTube channel, and you could have, all these things that other people had to spend thousands of dollars on. Everybody on the block can have one.
That's exactly right.
So it definitely leveled the playing field. But again, with that being said, you also have to sift through to find some quality content. So, we need
and
to
what
be
people are looking for, right? So like I post stuff every day, or almost every day. And then I did an experiment where I put a picture of my dog King up the other day. 1,700 likes. Do you know how long it takes me to get 1,700 likes on anything? 1,700 likes in 24 hours.
There you go.
Just because you're a cute gold German Shepherd.
There you go.
Maybe that's our problem. Our shepherds need to be German Shepherds.
Right.
But there's aspects to this that, like you were mentioning, that are the do's of the do's and the don'ts, but we'll concentrate on some of the do's of what we need to think about as we prepare to use this, right? So that is Millys Minute today. Millie is going to talk about some of the do's of social media and what we each need to think about that when we're putting out information and absorbing information. How does it relate to us, and how are we responsible for what we put out? So we're going to begin Millys Minute in 3, 2, 1.
Transform the ordinary. Sharing a photo of a statue or sharing a meal and the breaking of bread, the meal becomes more about spiritual nourishment as much as physical. An ordinary picture with a faith-filled message or scripture or dog can be transformational. Keep the apostles at our side. Following spiritual mentors and sharing their posts can help spread the gospel message. Plus, we all have those sisters and brothers in Christ that always like our photos and encourage us to continue to bring the faith message online. Old school crowdsourcing. Building up community is as old as the early Christians. A variety of projects are often supported by our faith community when our gifts, talents, and prayers come together for the greater good. Being our best selves in Christ. Having sincerity of heart helps put our best self forward while remaining authentic to who we are. Putting ourselves out there can be risky, but it is a great witness to our faith. Being neighbors. In communion of faith, there are no strangers. The light of faith can shine into the darkest of places where strangers become friends.
Oh, and that's funny because there's a lot of people that end up sharing what somebody else posts. And somehow become friends with people that they've never met through someone else.
Right.
So that's very cool, and it's very true.
Yeah.
And the other thing that you said that kind of made me chuckle a little bit was the early Christians using communication. And there's this adage that says, we as people have gone back to hieroglyphics because we use all these emojis now.
Right.
That nobody
I think there was somebody that was doing a Bible in all emojis.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, it's true. It's like there's an emoji for everything. And it's kind of the way that we summarize how we're doing. But I'm still convinced that when people put LOL, they're not really laughing out loud.
But interestingly enough, there's a lot of social platforms, a couple different podcasts that I listen to that are like almost 2 hours long.
Wow.
So you'd think that's so counterintuitive, but this person, it's a Rich Roll podcast I talked about a little bit on my show today, but he has discovered sort of a formula that he goes long and deep.
Right.
And he has such an amazing following, and he has built
But he knows his
tremendous
audience.
platform. Yeah.
Right. He has that audience where.
He has the people that want to take a deeper dive.
Right.
But see, I think his point too is he feels like everybody really wants to, but there's not enough people doing it well.
Sure. And then that's part of that knowing your call.
Mm-hmm.
And what you can share and what all of us can share follows those dues and the ability for it to grow. And then I would even go back to the catechism
Mm-hmm.
and give 4 major aspects that each and every one of us need to think about, whether we are making the post or whether we are listening to what somebody else posts. And here's how the catechism summarizes it.
Mm-hmm.
It says the information provided by the media is at service of the common good. Society has a right to information based on truth, freedom, justice, and solidarity.
Mm.
So, if what we're reading or what we're posting doesn't follow truth, justice, freedom, or solidarity,
Mm-hmm.
then that is the answer as to whether or not it is of God or something that we should be part of. So when you listen to a podcast that goes on for 2 hours,
Mm-hmm.
We try to do a half hour, and then sometimes I'm like, oh man, that person probably made it to work and turned us off. But you have to feel closer to God because of it.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you can't listen to that podcast about that subject
Mm-hmm.
for 2 hours. It's genuine. It's
Mm-hmm.
authentic.
Mm-hmm.
It leads you to a freedom to
Mm-hmm.
exist. I'm not saying that like Joe Rogan's podcast or things like that that are niche markets where people enjoy that type of humor, that they don't have a way to meet people in their medium.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm saying when it comes to faith,
Mm-hmm.
for us to hold somebody's attention for 2 hours,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard, but again, that audience, and you connect with somebody that you don't feel that you have to check everything that they say,
Mm-hmm.
but it entices you to go deeper, so that by proxy, you will check the sources of what somebody evangelized to you about, because you're learning more about the subject.
Mm-hmm. Well, and let's face it, everybody is at a different point in their spiritual walk.
Oh, sure.
And, a lot of times we joke about preaching to the choir, but the mission and what I'm very passionate about is sharing the walk of faith that I wish others knew was available to them.
Right.
So for me to share my story, or to say, this is who I was, this is who I'm becoming. I'm certainly not a saint by any means, but there's a tremendous amount available to us in social media, in all these different, classes, podcasts, presentations that we do. And it just you have to look and see if the desire is there.
Well,
it's not necessarily, us, providing the content, but there's also has to be that greater, deeper desire for God.
What we're doing here is we're just having a conversation. Like I was laughing because even before we started today, we're talking and it sounds like the show, right?
We do a whole podcast before the podcast.
There's a podcast before the podcast, and then we talk about none of the stuff that we talked about before we started. But it's true. It's like this is a normal conversation. This is inviting everybody that's listening in or watching to see this conversation where you and I are just journeying together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what people want. People want to know that you're not coming across as holier than thou.
Mm.
You have some understanding of what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And when you don't, you don't act like you do.
Right.
I used to laugh because when I was in sales years ago in the internet business, I wasn't a programmer.
Mm-hmm.
So there were things that I didn't know. So when we would go to a sales meeting, we would always take a programmer with us to the sales meeting.
Tech support.
Right. But the customers appreciated it because as a sales guy, I wasn't trying to give them an answer that I was going to make up on the spot.
Right.
I didn't know. So I brought the guy who would.
Right.
And so I think that even if we engage into some sort of social media commentary based on what we post, because get ready, if you want to share truth and love, you're still going to get backlash. You're still going to get people that come at you, that want to disagree with you, that are just angry that you are happy when things are tough. You're going to get some of that.
Oh, yeah.
And it can knock you back, but it's okay that if somebody wants to engage in a conversation with you that you aren't fully versed on, that you say, you know what, I don't have all the answers. And I'm glad that you mentioned that to me, because now I'm going to go look it up.
Yeah. That would happen to me as an educator. I would always over-prepare, big surprise. But I was always afraid they were going to do a stump the educator question, and I wasn't going to have the answer, and I was going to be mortified. But in training and working with some of these companies, they would just say, if you don't have the answer, just say you don't have the answer.
Yeah.
Or say, that's a great question. And when I find out, we'll both know. I mean, be authentic and be honest, and being holier than thou doesn't really serve any purpose, because then you kind of look like a hypocrite.
Yeah, it's kind of like we brought Millie in to stump Millie. We paid her all this money to come and speak, and now we just want to make you look like a fool. Right. But people will try to do that. Anybody with a platform feels the right to just be able to spout off and tell you things that they wouldn't tell you on the street. Yeah. They wouldn't tell you to your face.
I think, too, we have to be cognizant and aware that the more we try to lead people to Jesus, the bigger target we are for the devil. And I know a lot of people don't really believe in the evil and all that other stuff, but I am here to tell you, I had a couple nights ago, there was just so many horrible thoughts. Really, like I was drowning, and I just thought, man,
they weren't about me. Were
the
they?
evil
Like
one, no, they were all about me. But just the evil one really wants to prevent our mission,
right?
And it's real, and it happens. And so, like you say, there are going to be people outside of ourselves that do that. And we have to be strong in where are we in our relationship and faith. We have to put on the armor of God, have the sword of the word, and the helmet of salvation.
Well, and
we
even
have to have all that.
Even saying, but to yourself before you post something, to say that I'm about to post something knowing that I am responsible for the souls that it will reach. You are better off to not say anything at all than to preach an untruth, or to stoke a fire for the sake of stoking a fire because you're angry about something or you're hurt about something. So that's one thing that social media has lent itself to. But as we get ready to wind down, I think that looking at this aspect of utilizing social media as a faith platform, number one, should make us grow in our faith. Number two, that we should be inspired by the outreach that we can have. And number three, we should be humbled to think that we have the ability to change somebody's life forever if we just follow God's call. And that's that way with anything in ministry, but social media, everybody listening today who has an account has the ability to do that.
Right. Right, and it's powerful. It's very powerful when it's used and consumed for the good of the kingdom. Yeah.
Well, it's like somebody can walk up. Imagine like if this happened like in person. Imagine like if every social media conversation happened and like it was a cooking show and somebody walked up and pushed Bobby Flay out of the way and said, "You don't know how to cook. Let me show you how to cook. I've never cooked in my life before, but I'm about to show you how to make this dish." Or, or you showed Chip and Joanna Gaines. "I'll show you how to remodel a home. I don't even own one, but let me tell you how to do this." So it's kind of like that's what social media does. And it's kind of like, well, I don't know anything about what you're talking about, but I'm mad about it. So let me lob into you. So I do. I think that we know that it can do good. You mentioned the gap that it fills in the church and has filled during coronavirus. And we have the ability to offer a very powerful message, but we have to control our behavior in order to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, it's very, very tempting. One of the things I think about and I'm reminded of quite often is, you'll put a post out there and you'll get a like or a response from someone that, you didn't even know followed you, which is kind of like, wow, we have to remember the impact.
I thought that guy was dead.
Yeah. We do. We have to remember the impact that we can, and might have. And so it is. We do need to be conscientious before we post of, is this going to bring, the kingdom closer to God? And I mean, it's one of those things that we think about in prayer. There was a saying like, if your prayers aren't bringing anyone else to the kingdom, you need to rethink your prayer life.
Right. It is true. And all of us have that opportunity to do that. And like I said, you as a listener, this podcast that you've reached has become available because of social media, because of media platforms, and gives us the opportunity to share just a little bit of our faith with you. And so we encourage you to do the same in one that is truth and freedom and offers justice and solidarity, that we need to keep those things in mind. And it's only possible that we do this podcast because of our sponsors. And so we want to thank the Jess and Lillia Gifts from Above Foundation, who has been our podcast for 2020. And we're so grateful for all their support and all of their help. And if you'd like to become a sponsor or a donor to the program because you enjoy listening to it, or it's had an effect on your life or somebody that you know, you can always go to faithandreallife.com to make that donation. And you'll also find all of our other podcasts, some of the Faith and Real Life moments, as well as our live events and morning conversations that we do on Coffee and Conversation. And if you're looking for the podcast in all of its entirety or any of the other 23 episodes that exist, you can go to Apple Podcasts or find it anywhere that podcasts are found. And if you know somebody that needs it, definitely share with your friend. Now that I got that out of the way, final thoughts, Millie.
I just want to tell people the world is watching, so be a good witness.
Amen. And we live in a world that we are judged not by our best moments, but by our worst one. So stay true, stay holy, and I pray that God will meet you everywhere that you desire him this week. Take care.